So a couple of days ago, I was just searching for YouTube, and then YouTube suddenly recommended me my own video from a year ago. So I'm chilling. I'm like, okay, let's check that out. Let's see how my quality improved in the last year. And then I watched it, and after like half an hour of watching it, I found myself enjoying it and being like, wow, I learned a lot of interesting stuff. And then I'm like, wait a minute, that's me who's talking. How can I learn stuff from myself? I'm not forgetting stuff so fast, am I? And then I kind of saw that it's quite useful to write down some of your thoughts or record them for your later watching. So I feel like I learned so much about those books that I read a year ago that I would have forgotten otherwise. So I just thought that today I will record myself again and talk about the 5 most recent books that I've read, so that I can watch it like in a year in the future and refresh my memory about those books and what it was about them that captivated me or just left their impressions on me. This time I cannot show the books because I've read all of them on my Kindle. I bought it like 5 years ago for 120 euros, and I think this is one of the best investments I've done in my whole life. I also want to mention that I have a Goodreads account where I sometimes like post short reviews of the books I read, but it's not the same as going in depth and recording myself. So that's what I'm gonna do today. Alright, let's go. Today I'm gonna review 5 books and its common themes are identity. We could say the way in which we constitute our own identity. The first book that I'm gonna review today is by Daniel Case, Flowers from Algernon. This is a science fiction book from 1966. I had a brief obsession with a caretaker who is a musician. He tries to explore the phenomena of memory loss through different musical installments, and there is a succession of 6 albums where he gives us different melodies, but then they kind of lose in their resonance, they get disoriented and chaotic, and we kind of through the 6 albums we can observe how the melody gets distorted and destroyed and until nothing is left basically, and in that way he's trying to encapsulate what's going on in someone who's suffering from dementia. And after I heard that, I was completely blown away by this idea, and I hopped down into the comments. I asked whether there's anything like that, anything that would kind of explore the phenomena of mental degradation or decay from a first-person perspective. And somebody did answer with a suggestion that I should check out this book, Flowers for Algernon. This book won the 1966 Nebula Award for Best Science Fiction Novel, but it was a joint win with Babel 17, which is a science fiction novel that explores the idea of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is the idea that the language we speak determines the way we think. So anyways, this book is a first-person account of Charlie, who has a very low IQ, and he's given the opportunity to become smart. Some scientists have devised some way in which they can boost his IQ, so to speak, and they do manage that. And then we get to see the progress that Charlie makes, and he becomes a super genius who goes far beyond what his researchers and scientists are capable of following. And he begins to critique the very method by which they enabled him to have a high IQ, I suppose. And he realizes that the method leads to a decay of the brain that is equal to the progress that has been made since the treatment. So the protagonist is suddenly faced with the realization that very soon he will lose all of the mental cognitive abilities that he has gained through his treatment. This book offers a very heart-wrenching account on what it is like to realize that something is happening in yourself, that you're changing for the worse, that you're losing all of those attributes and abilities that made you who you are, until the protagonist himself kind of begins to forget what it was like to be that person. And it is a very heart-wrenching account, very analogous to the experience of what it must be like to have dementia. And it is in a way a written equivalent of what the caretaker is trying to do in his The Caretaker, Everywhere at the End of Time. Yeah, like I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with the caretaker's work, and probably not many of you are familiar with this novel. And if you like The Caretaker and what he has done there, you will definitely really appreciate what is going on in this novel. It is a extraordinary read, probably one of the best books that I've read in my life. The next book that I'm gonna review today is it's not a fiction book, strangely, but it feels like you would be reading fiction because it's ethically very, on the line. It is about a psychologist. His name is Milton Rokic. He's also the author of this book, and he wants to study the structure of our beliefs, and he hypothesizes that there are some beliefs that are on the periphery, very trivial. It's not really important to us if we believe one thing or the other. For example, I could believe that Obama is 55 years old, but then somebody would correct me and say that he's 60 years old, and I could be like, okay, like it wouldn't change anything for me, this information. So this belief I had about his age is not really crucial to my life. But then we get, we can go deeper and deeper into those core beliefs that do make a difference to my life. And I have a lot of emotional motivation, emotional reasons, existential reasons, we could also say, for believing them. And those claims include the beliefs about identity, who I am as a person. And this psychologist basically wants to study what happens when those core beliefs are being violated and we adopt a new identity, so to speak. So what happens and what has to happen so that we would change the beliefs that form the core of our whole worldview and belief system. And the idea that this psychologist had is to gather, he had a patient that believed himself to be Jesus Christ. And the psychologist thought, like, what if I get more people like that believe that they are Jesus Christ? And he searched for a while, and he actually found 2 more people that believed themselves to be Jesus Christ. So, and they were schizophrenics, and he thought, well, what if I would get those 3 supposed Jesus Christs in one room? What would happen? Because if there is another person next to you that claims to be Jesus Christ, then obviously he is very clearly violating your belief that you are Jesus Christ. And he wanted to see what the schizophrenics will do once they will be faced with such a violent violation of their belief system, and how they will account for the fact that there are 2 other people now in front of them claiming to be the same person. And it is interesting how the schizophrenics kind of accounted for that. Like one of them believed that he was the actual Jesus Christ, sent to this mental hospital, to help the other 2 schizophrenics realize that they are not Jesus Christ because he is. So in a sense that the doctor wants him to help him make the other people realize that they can't be Jesus Christ because that person is Jesus Christ. And There's a lot of mental gymnastics here. Extraordinary, and you forget that it is not fiction what you're reading. This actually happened. This actually happened. Like, it is, like, ethically, this is not a sound study, of course, but it happened. So, spoiler alert. Yeah, I forgot about spoiler alerts. Maybe you don't wanna know how the books end. I forgot about that. Sorry, but spoiler alert. If you don't wanna know what happens in the end, if you just wanna go read it, great. Then go do that and skip. Go to the next book. You have like markers down below, I think. But if what I just wanted to add is that this book ends with them just while they do make progress, they do start to realize what is going on. They become reflective of their situation. They just relapse. Like, whatever progress they make, they just relapse. It's like a never-ending cycle for them. They don't break free of their illusionary identity. Now let's go to a purely theoretical book. It is written by Matthew Kopp. It was released this year. The title is The Idea of the Brain, A History, and it goes through the historical metaphors by which we helped ourselves when we tried to understand the brain and cognition and the phenomena of the mental world, basically. And it's very informative, I would say, about where we are coming from, where our ideas about the brain are coming from. Even the first few chapters start with worldviews that completely negated the connection between brain and thought. Basically, for a long time in history, it was supposed that our thoughts, the seat of our cognition, is in our heart, so to speak, because that's where we feel mental states translate into emotions first. Then, of course, there was a connection made between the brain and thoughts, and it is very interesting how always we kind of strive to connect our brain with the most advanced technology that we have. For example, when Descartes was talking about the brain, he was very fascinated by the hydraulic Descartes was very impressed by the hydraulic figures that he found in the Ural Gardens. So he developed a hydraulic theory of the brain. Later, the brain was connected with clockwork, and they thought of a brain like a clockwork mechanism. That's also the ideas when you have like the human machine theories in the 18th, 17th century by Lametrie, for example. They also built like a metallic figures that imitated a writer, so to speak, and it had like an internal clockwork in order to do that, and it very impressed the people of that time a lot. And kind of the implicit thought was that, maybe humans are like a clockwork. Look how well the clockwork can imitate people. Later, the brain was thought as a sort of steam machine. That's also where Freud heavily drawed on when he talked about the brain, how you need to release some steam, or how you suppress trauma, and then you can explode if you don't let off some steam. Okay, he didn't say that, but that's kind of the folk psychology that formed itself around the steam engine analogy. And then for some while the brain was tried to be accounted for by the telegraphic network, like neurons and dendrites sending signals to each other. That's also the what we talked about last week. The China brain thought experiment kind of draws from this analogy. You can go check that out. Then we thought of the brain as an electrical field. I'm not really sure how that worked. I forgot. Then they started to think of cognition and the brain as a sort of computer. You have the hardware, the brain, and you have the software, the thoughts, which are logical gates, and the manipulation of different symbols. That's basically how Turing imagined it. In general, the book reads very well. It reads fantastically, actually, and it is very informative about where we are coming from when we are talking about the brain. It gives you an historical perspective. So and it also gives you a starting point when you try to understand how we are looking at the brain right now, because obviously right now we are again comparing our brain with the most advanced technology that we have available, and right now that is the principle of machine learning and how we currently imagine artificial intelligence. And well, that can be a very productive analogy. It is still good to be aware of the limitations that every analogy brought with itself. And while analogies help us understand some things, they also obscure other things. The next book that I've read is by Hannah Arendt, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. It is an account of the trial in 1961 of Adolf Eichmann, who escaped from Nazi Germany. He did not escape from Nazi Germany. He was part of Nazi Germany. He was the guy who organized the trains that went to Auschwitz and all the other concentration camps. And a friend from Argentina. How do you say Argentine? A friend for Argentina, that's how I'm gonna say it. He helped him escape to that country. And then in the Nuremberg trials that took place in Nuremberg after the First World War, the name Eichmann came up frequently. So he kind of became an important figure that had a hand in that. At least that's how he became to be viewed. Well, then in the 1960s there was a special squad from Israel that kidnapped Eichmann. There is a alright movie called Operation Finale that goes through how they catched Eichmann. It is quite a solid intro that you can watch before reading the book. It might help you to situate things that Arendt is talking about a little bit better, especially in the specific climate that was going on in the 60s in Israel. So anyways, Arendt is talking about the life and work of Adolf Eichmann. And what was striking to her and many people that were there at the trial is how normal Eichmann really seemed. He wasn't like a, psychopath, like a, evil, I don't know, something. Like he was quite a chill, normal guy who just kind of did his job. He wasn't really questioning it too much. He just had his own work, he had his own life, he has his own worries, so he just did what he had to do to get the promotions that he needed, kind of. That is kind of what Arendt is trying to point out in the title of the book, the banality of evil, although that very concept is being questioned all the time. Like, is it really so banal? Is he really so, ordinary? Would really, every ordinary person do the same that he did? And it just begs a lot of questions about circumstantial luck. Circumstantial luck is the problem in the field of moral luck, where we try to account for the problem that we are judging someone that did something bad, but he did something bad because he ended up in circumstances where everybody or most of the people would do bad. Therefore, if that is the case, do we really have the right to judge that person? This is of course a little bit problematic to suggest such a thing, that everybody would do such a thing. Like Eichmann didn't literally kill people himself with his gun, and of course Arendt was aware of all of those questions. She's just trying to explore morality through the phenomena of Adolf Eichmann. It reads very well. It is not a complicated book at all. Like, this book is based on her articles that she posted in the New York Times, so this is a bit more acceptable, and it reads well. It is informative and constructive. Okay, the last book that I want to review today is that was very stupid. I should not have put it there. Anyways, the last book I want to review today is by Jakob von Uexküll, a biologist and philosopher from the beginning of the 20th century, and this is the Slovenian translation, but the English title is A Foray into the Worlds of Animals and Humans, and it is a heavily illustrated book. And this is a book from a person that is a pioneer in a whole new way of looking at animals, because he's asking himself, like, is the tick a machine or a machine operator? Is it a mere object or a subject? And if we would follow like the old ways of looking at animals, for example, how Descartes looked at them as mere machinery, that's a very limiting view according to Uexküll, and he says that we should rather look at animals as subjects, as perceiving individuals, and in that way we can learn much more about the world, because we can try to reconstruct what it is like to be an animal, what it is like to see the world or perceive the world as a specific animal, as a specific organism, and by reflection we can then make very interesting and insightful observations about what it is like to be a human in the world, and what it is like to perceive the world as a human. And Uexküll is very well known for his biological reading of Kant, for example, and with his ideas he very heavily influenced the ideas of Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty and the whole phenomenological tradition, also Deleuze, and he is the pioneer of biosemiotics, the theory about how in natural environments signs are formed and interpreted. For example, if a bee sees another bee to do a dance, it can just by looking at that other bee figure out where the resources are that other bee is supposed to go get, like exactly like how many meters and in what direction. It's quite interesting how specific and detailed a communication between animals can be. And if we would just imagine animals as machines, we lose all of that. Well, there is a very heavily cited and famous quote from the beginning of this book, where Uexküll begins with like how we begin the foray through the animal worlds. Basically, we begin such a stroll on a sunny day before a flowering meadow in which insects buzz and butterflies flutter, and we make a bubble around each of the animals living in the meadow. The bubble represents each animal's environment and contains all the features accessible to the subject. As soon as we enter into one such bubble, the previous surroundings of the subject are completely reconfigured. Many qualities of the colorful meadow vanish completely. Others lose their coherence with one another, and new connections are created. A new world arises in each bubble. So in the book we have many illustrations of the world seen through a specific organism, and then in the last part we have a reflective part where we look at the human world, and we suddenly realize that the world we inhabit is not an objective space where like everything would be defined already, and we would just observe like a observer of a Renaissance painting where you've basically given the angel's viewpoint and you can view everything objectively and so on. Like in reality, we inhabit a very specific, biologically determined world, and things around us are not given to us because they are beautiful or they are interesting. They are given to us because we need to perceive them in order to survive, or at least we needed to in a natural setting. And our human viewpoint, our human gaze on the world is a gaze conditioned through a long evolution of having to survive in a specific environment with specific predators and specific forms of food. And once you realize that and supplement it through the careful study and observation of how animals behave in the world and how they interpret the world around them as simpler organisms, you can translate that knowledge into what specifically is at play when humans look at the world and what conditions their gaze. So, an extraordinary book. For reference, a book that very tellingly draws on such observation is one by Aldous Huxley. It is actually an essay. It is called The Doors of Perception, where Aldous Huxley takes mescaline and observes how the fact that he took mescaline messes up his entire psychological constitution and enables him to see things that he would not see in his natural, biologically determined way of looking at the world. And in this view, kind of, Huxley theoretizes that the psychedelic experience enabled him to transcend the biological conditions of being a human, at least the evolutionary determined way of how he is supposed to see the world, and enabled him to see an alternative, to achieve an alternative viewpoint on the world, a different one that kind of enriched him with a new experience and with the knowledge that the way he is looking at the world is just one way of looking at the world. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you're still here, I just wanted to, as said, I just wanted to record this because I found it very useful, the video from a year ago, so that I could refresh a little bit on those books. Quite nice. So hello me, if you're still alive a year in the future and you're watching this, no problem. I hope you learned something.